right, amen. Thank you, guys. Thanks for your prayers. And we continue in the Old Testament looking at the stories that go along with Joseph. Joseph was kind of a series. The first cluster of 5 was the beginning. Second was patriarchs. The third one has been the idea of Joseph and his story, which is a pretty significant part. And with all the craziness that goes on with Joseph, I'm surprised he got that much press, but I'm thankful that God chose to include Joseph and his family in fulfilling the promise to Abraham that comes down to Jesus eventually. And so we're thankful for the ability to look at that story. I've asked Stan to read Genesis chapter 45 and go into chapter 46 down through verse 7, which is the story that is about whenever Joseph reveals himself to his brothers. He has to tell them a number of times that it's him, and they can't hardly believe it, and neither can his father when he finds out. So Stan, if you would read that scripture, we would appreciate it.
Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, "Have everyone leave my presence." So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. And then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." When they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will not be plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household and ruler of all Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and say to him, 'This is what your son Joseph says. God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me and don't delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me, you, your children and grandchildren, your flocks and herds, and all you have. I will provide for you there because 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise, you and your household and all who belong to you will become destitute. You can see for themselves, and so can my brother Benjamin, that it is really I who am speaking to you. Tell my father about all the honor accorded me in Egypt and about everything you have seen, and bring my father down here quickly." And then he threw his arms around his brother Benjamin and wept, and Benjamin embraced him, weeping. And he kissed all his brothers and wept over them. Afterward, his brothers talked with him. When the news reached Pharaoh's palace that Joseph's brothers had come, Pharaoh and all his officials were pleased. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Tell your brothers do this. Load your animals and return to the land of Canaan, and bring your father and your families back to me. I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you can enjoy the fat of the land." You are also directed to tell them, "Do this. Take some carts from Egypt for your children and your wives, and get your father and come. Never mind about your belongings, because the best of all Egypt will be yours." So the sons of Israel did this. Joseph gave them carts as Pharaoh had commanded, and he also gave them provisions for their journey. To each of them he gave new clothing, but to Benjamin he gave 300 shekels of silver and 5 sets of clothes. And this is what he sent to his father: 10 donkeys loaded with the best things of Egypt, and 10 female donkeys loaded with grain and bread and other provisions for his journey. Then he sent his brothers away, and as they were leaving, he said to them, "Don't quarrel on the way." So they went up out of Egypt and came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan. And they told him, "Joseph is still alive. In fact, he is ruler of all Egypt. And Jacob was stunned. He did not believe them. But when they told him everything Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the carts Joseph had sent to carry him back, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. And Israel said, I'm convinced my son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die. So Israel set out with all that was his, and when he reached Beersheba, he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. And God spoke to Israel in a vision at night and said, Jacob, Jacob. Here I am, he replied. I am God, the God of your father, he said. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you into a great nation there. I will go down to Egypt with you, and I will surely bring you back again. And Joseph's own hand will close your eyes. Then Jacob left Beersheba, and Israel's sons took their father Jacob and their children and their wives in the carts that Pharaoh had sent to transport him. They also took with them their livestock and the possessions they had acquired in Canaan. And Jacob and all his offspring went to Egypt. He took with him to Egypt his sons and grandsons and his daughters and granddaughters, all his offspring.
All right. Thank you very much, Dan. What do we learn about God in this passage? Or in the bigger picture of things that we learn at this point?
God had a plan for
He always has a
family of his family.
Okay. God had a plan, and you said God put Joseph where he wanted him.
God was looking after the long haul. He was preparing them to be a great nation.
Right. Looking at the long haul, make Israel a great nation, or the descendants of Israel.
I think this part of this lesson is all about forgiveness.
Good. I think you're right. It's all about forgiveness. It's interesting to look at the big story where it looked like Joseph's daddy favored him and did all this good stuff to him, and then he went to a really difficult part of life, and then now coming full circle, God is rewarding him again. Yes. Humility from Joseph. Very good.
I said, but you asking about what we see about God. One of the things I've noticed as we read these stories, that promise was made to Joseph a long, long time ago. And God makes us the same promises and same assurances that if we're faithful to him, he'll do these things. But over the years, as things materialize, they don't always work out, or we lose sight of that promise that he made. And even with Joseph, Joseph, he gets put through all this stuff, okay, but he's not realizing, or at least he doesn't appear to be. He doesn't realize when he's in prison that God's working through that. Okay, so God may work through my life one of these days with cancer or heart attack or something else, okay? But he's promised me one thing, that if I stay true to him, I'll have eternal life. Joseph stayed true to him. All this stuff happened to him, but eventually Joseph got to where he wanted to a long time. And I don't think Joseph gave up, but I don't think he continuously remembered, or he would maybe have seen things a little differently than he did.
Right.
We need to look at the big picture rather than just this one little spot where we are right now. Where I am right now is just a moment in my life, not my life. Like sometimes I think, this is all there is, but I've had a great life and I'll continue to have a good life. Doesn't mean that things aren't going to happen. But during the travel, during the trip, if I'll just be faithful, just like with Joseph, everything will work just like God said.
Right.
We need to look at that too.
Yeah, to reflect and think about, Joseph was 17 when he was sold into slavery. And by the time he was 30, he was in charge. He was running the show. He was, well, in this translation, he was made father to Pharaoh. Kind of the term is really more about an advisor, but sometimes they would refer to them as a father. And at 33, and he spent half of his life in Egypt kind of growing up, but now he's in charge and he had those dreams and all this plan to make sure it was God. And he probably did wonder a lot through all of that. But at this point, now that he's getting ready to reveal himself to his brothers, he looks at it as God sent him. God was doing all this all the way along. And our lives can be that way as we look back, that God was always working. This chapter starts out where Joseph could, the New International Version says, no longer control himself. He was very emotional whenever he was thinking about his brothers, but here he's before attendants and he was trying to stay composed. And because of that, he asked his attendants to leave so he could talk to his brothers and reveal himself. And it's in verse 2, it says he wept so loudly. He was anxious, he was relieved, he was so happy to be able to reveal himself to them. Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. He had to say that twice. I'm sure they were in such denial, and maybe they were starting to see everything come together. And he's, yes.
Well, probably they were in such a subservient role, they never really even looked at him eye to eye. They probably always had their heads down, so they did not realize.
Right.
It says they were terrified when he first told them, not knowing what he would do. I guess they were judging him by themselves.
Right. And he really helps them a lot. He, being one of the younger ones of all the brothers, he helped them get to a good place in understanding what God was doing. And one of his big questions was, is my father still living? I think, being in Joseph's shoes, he knew the clock was ticking, the time was going on, and he was very concerned about seeing his father again. And I think it's interesting in verse 4, he tells his brothers, come close to me. And he had to tell them again, I'm your brother Joseph, and the one you sold into Egypt. And I'm sure at that point their hearts are sinking, but he does say, don't be distressed. Don't be angry with yourselves for selling me. It was all part of God's plan. Now, we go through difficult times, and as Ella said, sometimes it's hard to see God working, but we have to trust that God is always working, and things will work out for good. And it may take 20 years, it may take longer. Of course, God was very patient in his plan, fulfilling the promise to Abraham through the time of Jesus. And of course, he tells them to go get their family and come back, and they're going to live in the region of Goshen. Have you ever heard the expression land of Goshen? Well, they were to live there, which was really not too far from their homeland. But of course, as time goes on, descendants become part of Egypt. And of course, Jacob is going to die, and God has promised him that he will be able to get back home, be buried at home. But there was 5 more years of famine, so he said, you guys need to go back and get your daddy. You need to bring everybody down here, and it's a whole list of people that are brought down in, wow, I don't see it now. All the at the very end, all the kids and the grandkids and all of that, all of us people, and it was going to take a lot of wagons, a lot of the moving company was going to have a lot to move. So, yes, Donna.
And at that time, they buried the bones of Joseph.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, they that promise was fulfilled as well. Yes, Wiley.
When they moved down to the land of Goshen, where was Joseph and Pharaoh as far as distance between the two? Do you have an
Wow.
idea where Pharaoh was located?
I
And
don't
Joseph?
know for sure. Does anybody else know? I'd have to look that up.
I was curious.
I don't think the Bible says exactly where he is. I think we can summarize, take some guesses, but perhaps the closest he might have been would be what was later called Ramses, which is located in the more uh, near the termination of the Nile River.
Yeah,
A lot of old Egypt was in way on down the Nile to the south.
Very good. Were you going to say something, Dale?
Oh, I was just going to say that, over in the latter part of chapter 46, says that there were 66 persons, but other places says there were 76. So there were about that number. And, that had to make a really impressive caravan traveling from across over to Egypt.
Yeah. And I read somewhere where that was about a 200-mile trip for them.
Mhm.
So that would be a big caravan. In this, as Larry mentioned, forgiveness, I think very powerful about forgiveness, and reconciliation is a key thing. I think in verse 14 and 15, he threw his arms around Benjamin and wept, and Benjamin embraced him weeping, and he kissed all his brothers, and he wept over them. Joseph was the adult in the room. He was the one looking out for them. And of course, the brothers talked to him, and I'm sure they had a lot of conversation before sending them off. But Pharaoh wanted to load them up with everything to be able to go back home and send a lot of blessings their way.
Mhm.
In the New International Version, it says carts, but I think some translations use the word wagons. And he said, don't worry about your belongings. Whenever your family gets here, we're going to roll out the red carpet, and they're going to have better stuff here than what they did back home, which is amazing to me that Pharaoh appreciated Joseph so much and his family so much. And of course, he sent Benjamin. He gave him 300 shekels of silver and 5 sets of clothes. The other brothers, doesn't say they were jealous this time. But anyway, they loaded up and took off.
It is interesting, Kevin, that to me, it's very interesting that he says, go down and tell my father about all the splendor you see. And I'm wondering if he's kind of hearkening back to, his dreams where the brothers would bow down, he told his father he would bow down and those kinds of things. So I'm wondering if that's part of the way he's making them aware that I really am Joseph.
Right.
I don't know. I just thought it was an interesting phrase that says, you must tell my father of all my splendor in Egypt.
Yeah.
It seems like that wouldn't have occurred to me to say that.
Right.
And then I thought it was very interesting a little further down where he says, don't quarrel.
Yeah.
Don't quarrel on the journey.
That sounds like a father saying.
Yeah, and I've kind of wondered as Christians on our journey,
Yes.
do we need to kind of take heed to that? Don't quarrel on the journey. Don't argue.
Yeah. Jesus kind of told us that.
Yeah.
Jesus encouraged us as Christians not to fight, to be united, that his kingdom isn't of this world.
That just kind of popped out at me, as we were reading it. I was like, oh my goodness, I guess I'd forgotten about all that or hadn't noticed it, one of the two. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah,
It
thank
may
you.
be that he was really concerned about his brothers Benjamin's welfare. because of the hatred and the jealousy of his brothers towards him and his younger brother. That family was a very dysfunctional family to begin with. And Joseph wanted to make sure that everybody got back home safely. If you'll notice the gifts that he gave his brother, 70, as if I recall, something pieces of silver and some other precious things, plus more garments than he gave the other brothers. And this in itself could kind of make the brothers jealous, even more jealous. So he's saying, don't squabble, don't get angry with each other.
Yeah, because they've had a history of squabbling, haven't they?
Yeah.
Well, as Jacob goes to Egypt, or calls him Israel, and different translations go back and forth. I know Larry asked that question a few weeks ago. God spoke to Israel in a vision on the way, and he said, Jacob, Jacob, and Jacob responds, here I am. And God says, I am the God of your father. And don't be afraid to go down to Egypt. I'll make you into a great nation. That's a reflection on God's promise to Abraham, I think. And it goes on to say in that verse, I will surely bring you back again. So as Joseph leaves the promised land, he's going to return. And he says, Joseph's own hand will close your eyes. The idea of death and closing their eyes. Well, anything else on that one?
The men now are talking about
Either one?
I wonder how long that trip was for the brothers who remembered all the way to home and all the way back, how they treated Joseph. And how they remembered the dream that they were going to bow down before them. I'd almost been scared to go back personally, okay, because their last thoughts have been Joseph's last thoughts of them. If he had been like me, would have been vindictive and this what you did to me, you get through the best way you can. Okay? But Joseph's not like me, so Joseph was forgiving and merciful and loved his brothers, even though they treated him terrible, he still loved them. And I got some people that have treated me kind of terribly, and I've had a hard time loving them, but don't be like me, be like Joseph. That's what.
Yes.
But can you imagine those that maybe the horror that was in their minds, because they're remembering that they bowed down before him. Yeah, and he's the ruler. He's one word and they're gone. They're toast. Okay, and they've got to go back now and face them.
Right.
They don't have any choice. They've got to. Okay, they got to go back. It's like when you have to go see the principal of school. You don't know what's coming down the pipe, but you got to go.
Yeah.
And it's humorous in a way to think about it, because it's not humorous, but for me, it's some kind of humorous. What's going through their minds?
Yeah, that's true. They were hungry, so they were willing to do whatever. Yes.
Well, the fact that he treated Benjamin so much better kind of gave them what to think about when they were going home. But there's still the price to pay for crossing there, so it's really as good as it sounds.
Yeah. All right, let's go to John